Well, welcome to the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay, joined by Eric Stearns, and today we're digging into my message from Sunday, which was about the second statement that Jesus makes from the cross, where he says to the penitent thief, "Surely you'll be with me in paradise." And so Eric and I are going to dig in and talk a little bit more about the penitent thief. How did he end up there, and what does this have to do with our own understanding of how we enter into the kingdom of God? So let's get into it.
So, okay, the human side of me needs to ask the question though. Like, it's unfair, right? So these people can do terrible things their entire life, and then right at the end still ask for forgiveness, and Jesus will forgive them if they're sincere.
Right.
When we spend our whole lives striving to do what's right, we still slip up. Thank goodness we can still ask for forgiveness when we slip up, but
Right.
we're at least trying throughout.
Yeah.
What keeps us from just saying, we'll just we'll just screw around until the end and then ask for forgiveness. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
obviously not anything that I would want to do, but
Right.
your brain can go there.
It absolutely can, definitely. I mean, like there's the parable that Jesus tells in the Gospels of, there's a vineyard owner that went out looking for hired help, and he hired some people at 9 o'clock, and he hired some people at noon, and he hired some people at 3 o'clock, and then he hired some people at like 4:30, to put that in like our terms, modern terms. And he paid everybody the same. And people at 9 o'clock are like, what in the world, dude? How can you do that? And the people that got hired at 4:30 are like, hey, I'm gonna work for this guy again because I did a half an hour's work for an entire day's wages. But that really is how the grace of God works. Like that's why Jesus told the parable, because there are people that will come to faith early in life, live a Christian faith throughout the entirety of their lives, be a beacon of hope, be a beacon of love, be a beacon of encouragement, be a beacon of evangelism, and at the end of the day, we get the same reward. Yeah, it is inherently unfair from a human perspective, but along the way, look at how much good we were able to do.
Mm.
Look at how much we were able to witness for the gospel. Look how many, hopefully, look at how many lives we touched by doing what we have done. And so
Right.
when we get to heaven and hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant," it just means that much more.
Well, you think about all of the earthly rewards we'll have because
Mhm.
we're people of character, because we're people of God.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not going to be as easy, but we're going to have a life that's not nearly. It's not going to be. No life is easy,
Right.
and if you spend your life doing terrible things, well, that's really hard because you're running from things, you're covering things up, you're always stressed out, right?
Hmm.
But at least we're able to somewhat live at peace, knowing that we're doing the right thing, we're doing what Jesus has asked us to do.
Absolutely.
Because if you, in my opinion, if you're at the end of your days and you ask for forgiveness from Jesus because you've known your whole life that you shouldn't have been doing what you're doing, your
Hmm.
whole life you're living with that guilt. Your whole
Yeah.
life you're living with the idea that I know I'm screwing up, but I'm not going to change. Or I'm
Mm.
choosing not to change.
Yep.
And yeah, our life becomes then inherently much easier than
Hmm.
um, than just doing bad things all the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. You don't have to keep your story straight if you're just telling the truth. That
Exactly.
whole thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. This level of sincerity to it too, because if people ask to be forgiven by Jesus at the twilight of their lives, when they finally realize their own mortality, even though we all know we're going to die, but when you come to that real final moment, there is this, this sense of clarity of, okay, now what really does happen next? Because I haven't had to worry about it yet. So now what does happen next? And, you know, eternity with Jesus sounds a whole lot better than eternity in hell, being
Hmm.
tortured and whatever. And so people, they make these. I don't want to ever doubt the sincerity of someone's faith, but especially in those dying moments. But there does have to be a sincerity of, I realize that what I have done in my life up until now is not good.
So did you cut anything this week?
Um, I don't think that I did, to tell you the truth.
We were even out of church early, Clay,
I know, right? I was very
by like a
proud.
minute or two.
I was kind of wondering how hold all this because we're doing a past offering now. We're not just doing a passive offering by having the offering
Hmm.
plates available at the back. And so we were adding in elements to worship, and so we didn't. I mean, and with the praise band Sundays, we didn't even cut a song. We put a song in a different spot.
Hmm.
So I was really concerned with how that was going to work out timing wise, but it so far it's been really good for us. So. We'll see. Next
Yeah.
Sunday we have choir as well as an offering, and so it'll be kind of interesting to see. And then in a couple of weeks we have a baptism and offering, so it could be really interesting to see how that all works out.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Um, I think the passing of the offering plate is a good thing.
I
It
do
has been
too.
and
I
well
do too.
received.
Yep. Well, and it's just, I mean, this is not a podcast about stewardship and generosity, but because we're, making some changes to that, it comes up. I just think that we're talking about it more. I mean, even just by having an off, like, because there are times before the way we were doing it, I would probably mention it 75% of the time. Sometimes I'd
Hmm.
be pressed for time. Sometimes I would just forget. Sometimes, whatever. But say 75% of the time I was saying, hey, we do have an offering in the back of the church. If you want to help support the mission and ministry of the church, please give generously and faithfully. And that has worked for the most part. But, this has definitely been it's easier to talk about when you already know that there's going to be a plate passed and how that's all going to operate. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's going to be good for us in the long run.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, no, as far as the sermon goes, really, I don't think I did cut much. But I did have a very interesting encounter after worship.
Really?
Someone that attends our church that also listens to the podcast. Because she was not in church, but she heard the sermon because she listens to the podcast.
Mm.
Um, but someone sent me a picture of herself at age 37 with a neon purple hairdo and a septum piercing after I had said during the church service that I'm 37 years old and I think that I am too old for, a non-naturally occurring hairstyle and also more piercings than I used to have.
That's funny.
So yes, she very much respectfully and she kind of put me in my place and said, that whole never say never did a whole lot of the lifting in that sermon.
Mm.
So yep. Yeah, but I would say I was speaking on my own behalf. If that is still, a desire that somebody has at 37 or at 67, go for it. You do you. But I just, for myself and for where I am in my life, I just don't think that's for me, and that's okay.
But yeah, you can never say never, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
only two the only two responses that are always wrong are never and always.
Nice. I like
Mm.
that.
Any other thoughts on the sermon? Anything you wanted to kind of branch off on?
It's the thieves on the cross are always an interesting topic for me. Because there is this debate that happens among theology people about, is baptism necessary for salvation? Jesus at the end of at the end of the Gospels in the Great Commission in Matthew's Gospel says, "Go therefore and baptize."
Hmm.
In Acts, when Philip has his interaction with the Ethiopian official or the Ethiopian eunuch, that story ends with a baptism. The conversion of Cornelius and his entire household is a baptism. The Apostle Paul baptized folk a lot of the time. There so baptism is very, very important, but is it necessary for salvation? The big counter argument to people that will say that baptism is absolutely necessary for salvation is the thief on the cross, because there was no baptism. There is only confession and recognition of who Jesus is, and then death. And
Hmm.
Jesus says, "You will be with me in paradise. You will be there when and you've made it. You have a sincere heart. You're making a sincere confession in the most dire of circumstances. You realize when you are on the cross dying for your sins, dying for your wrongdoings, for your own wrongdoings. Jesus died for everybody's sins, but this penitent thief is on the cross dying for his own wrongdoings, and he has this moment of crystallizing clarity where he says, "Wow, I deserve to be here." And Jesus doesn't. And so I'm going to reach out to Jesus and say, "You are who you said you are. Remember me when you come into your kingdom." There is no time for a baptism there. So,
Hmm.
and so that's the big counter argument is the thief on the cross.
Yeah.
So,
That's just so awesome.
mhm. Yeah,
Every time. I mean, I feel like we talk about this all the time with every character in the Bible, but if those guys can do, if those guys can make a difference in the world of Christianity in our world, then why
right.
can't we?
Yep.
If that guy can be forgiven by Jesus, then we can ourselves can be forgiven and we can forgive others.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, these first two statements from the cross really do pair well together because it is Jesus pronouncing forgiveness over whatever them means, because it's Father forgive them, and we talked during the sermon and during the podcast last week about who is them, how does that work, who's covered by that them, and then we go right into the second statement, which is, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom, and Jesus saying, "You'll be with me in paradise." Again, that extending that forgiveness. He pronounces forgiveness over the crowds and the amorphous them, but then here he is practicing forgiveness in a very real, like tangible state. It's not
Hmm.
just the concept of forgiveness. It's not just, a blanket proclamation. It is a real reality in the life of this penitent thief and not in the other one because he has joined the crowds that's hurling insults and, you know, um, yeah, asking for his own mercy, for his own sake, rather than for the sake of other folks.
Hmm.
Yeah. And where we fall as United Methodists is that we do not believe that it is absolutely vital for salvation, that it is not necessary to or a barrier from salvation. You can be a fully committed lifelong Christian and never experience the waters of baptism. You can live that way. The Holy Spirit moves and works in people's lives even without a baptism. But the baptism is a public profession of the faith that is already existing. It's a public acknowledgement of the relationship that God is already forming in us and the covenant relationship that we share with God. And also because we do baptisms in the context of worship, it is this communal moment of saying, "We as your church, we have got you."
Hmm.
We're going to surround you with this love and with this care. Even if you are an infant and you're being baptized, we are going to teach you Chi Alpha. We're going to help you learn about the Bible. We're going to introduce you to Jesus. Or if you're a 57-year-old man, we've still got you. We are surrounding you with love and forgiveness and community and everything. And it's all motivated by the work of God in our own hearts. It's an extension of the work of God in our own hearts. So it's very important. It's very important. Don't ever hear that wrong. But is it absolutely necessary for salvation? I do not think the answer has to be yes. It is interesting to me that my friend and colleague, Pastor Katie Rickey down in Yankton, also preached on this text on Sunday,
Oh,
as it
perfect.
is a part of her sermon series. And one of the things that she focused on is the fact that we don't know what their crimes were. We the other thieves on the cross. We know that Jesus' crime was making claims of being the Messiah when he wasn't the Messiah, but also having the disciples and the support and the whole network of people to kind of back up his claim. So we don't know if they were, we know that they were thieves in bad enough shape to necessitate crucifixion, but we do not know exactly the nature of their crimes.
That is interesting. So as we continue, I guess we'll kind of look forward to what next week holds.
Yeah, so the next statement from the cross comes as Jesus sees his mother and also his beloved disciple John at the foot of the cross. And in that moment, he creates a new family by saying, "Behold your son," to Mary, and then saying to John, "Behold your mother." And so Jesus redefines and reinterprets the relationship that's happening at the foot of the cross. He's also ensuring the care of his mother going forward because we believe Mary to be a widow. And so now with Jesus having lost Joseph and now having lost Jesus, yes, she has other sons, but she's lost her eldest, which is important in that society. And also, because the rest of his brothers kind of turned their back on Jesus, we don't know what that relationship is like. There's a moment in the gospel earlier on where Jesus has just done this series of healings, and people are like, "Well, here's your mom and your brothers and stuff. You want to come out and say hi?" And Jesus is like, "Whoever does the will of my Father is who really my mother and brothers are." And I think the brothers had enough at that moment. Until James, the brother of Jesus, who goes on to write the book of James, kind of gets turned around in the post-resurrection appearances. But yeah, just this idea that Jesus, even from the cross, is ensuring the care of other people, ensuring the care of his mother, ensuring the care of this disciple to whom he's grown quite close. It just talks about the nature and the heart of who Jesus was and is, but then also just kind of helps us identify ourselves in this story as those that are made into family by the power of Jesus.
Mhm.
So that'll be our focus on Sunday.
Gotcha. Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us on this week's Cut for Time podcast. Join us again next week in person at 10 a.m. or on Facebook or on YouTube or however you're getting hold of us, or back here for the podcast next week.
Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.